The question is now that the amendment be agreed to, and I give the call to the honourable member for Flinders.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. So payday for the Australian Union movement has finally come, and what a golden pot of power this bill bestows on them. This bill has been called radical, extreme, interventionist, heavy-handed, costly, complex and economically damaging, and rightly so. The recently departed CEO of the Business Council of Australia, Jennifer Westacott, called it one of the most radical overhauls of Australia's system in decades and will impact every worker, contractor and business at a time of rising economic uncertainty and a cost of living crisis. The head of the Minerals Council of Australia, Tanya Constable, described its context thus: "The nation's ongoing prosperity is under assault. So why now would it be wise to place even greater restraints on the Australian economy? Why would it be prudent at this very time to increase the burden on Australia's productive workplaces and threaten investment and job creation?" The Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry calls it, as they see it, as the greatest invasion of the place and progress of business by the union movement, and I quote, "The government is seeking to deputise union delegates, establish them in proxy law enforcement roles," said CEO Andrew McKellar. But more important to me than the views of ACCI, BCA and the Minerals Council are the views of my constituents in Flinders. 2 weeks ago today, Senator Michaelia Cash, our Shadow Minister on Industrial Relations, came down to my electorate and met with around 30 local Flinders businesses, ranging from the local Baker's Delight franchise to the globally leading industrial enterprises located on the Mornington Peninsula. And over a couple of hours, we talked through the proposed reforms contained in this bill, many of which those who gathered had heard absolutely nothing about. Others were already in the trenches trying to navigate the vast damage that these bills will do to their business model and their employment practices, mostly to meet their employees' needs and preferences, but also to be able to meet customers' demands, to stay globally competitive and to sustain Australia's manufacturing base. Others had no idea of what was coming their way. So busy are they meeting the day-to-day demands of running their businesses. You see, the Mornington Peninsula economy survives on seasonal, casual and contractor employment. The offer of casual rates is often the only way you get young people to work through the peak summer season. The use of contractors is how we sustain our services sector in aged care, retirement living, health, education, childcare. Each and every day, hundreds of workers are being bussed from the northern suburbs to meet the demands of our local businesses. Ask any employer already and they will tell you wages are already unaffordable. Worker accommodation is impossible to find. There is next to no public transport, so both travel and travel time must be funded by the boss. Business loan interest payments are soaring and their home mortgage, against which the business is often guaranteed, is also soaring. They are drowning in red tape. And now this. At a tourism roundtable I held last week, I heard that many are just trying to get through this summer season to see if they can make it through to the end of the financial year. But at our IR roundtable 2 weeks ago, as we sat in the modest but magnificent Western Port Yacht Club looking out to a grey ocean, I watched as my constituents' faces turned similarly pale. Quietly afterwards, someone said to me, as many others have said in other contexts, "Has anyone in this Albanese government ever run a business?" The head of the Master Builders Association came to see me yesterday. I always welcome them with open arms, of course, because Flinders in any given year is more likely than not to hold the enviable crown of being the tradie capital of the nation. That is, the highest number of people employed in the construction industry. We were pipped by Casey last year, and I'm sure the member for Casey will come in to remind me shortly, but I am sure that we will resume that crown at the next count. But either way, some 15% of total employment in my electorate relates to the construction industry, with some 10,000 people engaged in it and almost 2,500 small businesses in the building and construction industry across Flinders. You see them every morning, lined up at the tuck shop in Rosebud Industrial Estate or the Cunha General Store in Sorrento, the little tuck shop in Dramana, the endless procession of laden utes grabbing the nation's best egg and bacon rolls at dawn, the lucky ones having already had a surf in the morning before a long day on the tools. And the master builders who represent so much of the tradie community in my electorate has been clear about the impact of this bill on them. Debita Warren's CEO says the amendments will cause severe damage and negatively impact the over 440,000 businesses that operate in building and construction and the 1.3 million people they employ. In Warren's words, it represents a fundamental upheaval of many tried and tested components of Australian workplace laws. It is simply bad law and bad policy. There's more. It is complex, complicated, costly and unnecessary. It will hurt small business and undermine people's rights to be their own boss. It will be a lawyer's picnic, and despite comments suggesting it won't impact building and construction, the bill, as introduced, very clearly opens the door by taking a general approach of you are in unless you can argue your way out. Now, when I started my professional career, I was an IR lawyer. In addition to private practice with Cause as an article clerk and then Freehills as a senior associate, I spent a number of months seconded to the Department of Workplace Relations in this city, working on the second iteration of Howard-era workplace reform under the late, great Peter Breath as IR Minister. Today, just the explanatory memorandum of this bill is larger than the entire Workplace Relations Act of 1996, which I worked on at the time. And this bill, if implemented, will cripple Australian businesses, small to large alike, smashed by heavy-handed red tape, back-breaking complexity and immeasurable cost. The bill offers no improvements in terms of productivity and adds to the cost of living pressures already felt by Australian businesses, families and workers. It will unquestionably add billions to the wage bills of small to large businesses alike, while offering little in terms of uplift and flexibility for workers who will find themselves stuffed into one-size-fits-all suiting with union overlords looking over their shoulder. Modest estimates to the cost to business by the Department of Employment and Workplace Relations suggest it will add $510 million a year if just 66,000 labour hire workers fall under the new Fair Work Commission orders, and the additional cost for digital platform workers will be $4 billion over a decade. Conservative maths says this bill will cost employers more than $9 billion over a decade and lead to scores of job losses. This bill is yet another, but perhaps the most egregious aspect of this government's war on Australian business, all Australian business. Even the government's favourite, Qantas, hates this bill, recently saying to the Senate inquiry on it that it would compromise the viability of services, particularly regional ones, undermine job security and create market distortions by way of an unlevel playing field in circumstances where competitors will not be captured by the proposed reforms, according to Nathan Safe, who gave evidence to the Senate. So let us look at some of the most concerning provisions of this bill in closer detail. Let me start with union entry rights, because it's clear from those provisions alone who exactly the Albanese government is putting at the centre of the Australian workplace. In providing advice to business, my former firm of Freehills described it thus: the bill forms part of a specific policy framework which seeks to reinvigorate participation in both trade unions and the enterprise bargaining regime. Their colleagues at Ashurst were blunter, stating that the bill builds on the already significant changes made in December 2022 to further entrench the role of unions in Australian workplaces. Union organisers will get reasonable access to the workplace and paid union training. Going forward, all awards and agreements must enshrine these rights. Yet reasonable access is nowhere clearly defined, no doubt leading to endless disputation between workers and unions over exactly what is allowed. Moreover, unions are given extraordinary powers to enter workplaces without any notice whatsoever if it has a reasonable suspicion that a union member is being underpaid, and to inspect employment records, including of non-union members. Turning to the provisions once known as same job, same pay, these provisions will act as a handbrake to productivity and flexibility in the workplace and demonstrate just how out of touch Labor is. The AI Group has indicated the ambit of this new provision potentially interferes with a raft of other commercial arrangements between businesses that haven't traditionally been considered labour hire. Again, my old firm Freehills warned the new provisions are not necessarily confined to traditional labour hire. For example, it could potentially extend to service contractors and internal group entities that supply labour within a corporate group. Furthermore, the scope of the regulated labour hire regime is also not limited to employers who are based in Australia, and implies regarding of whether or not the host employers are themselves currently subject to the Fair Work Act. The exemption for three-month surge or seasonal workforces falls far short of the more realistic and flexible 12 months sought by business groups, and certainly far short of any seasonal work done in my electorate. It also requires the employer to convince the Fair Work Commission exceptional circumstances exist to justify the order. Now turning to Labor's war on casual employment. The provisions of this bill are designed to complicate and disincentivise casual employment, even though we know that the vast majority of casuals choose casual employment to suit their life circumstances, especially the 25% uplift on their hourly rates. The bill sets out a conga line of criteria, 3 pages long, 15 factors, to work out whether a relationship is truly casual or not, largely characterised by an absence of a firm advance commitment to continuing and indefinite work. Even then, when the test for casual is met in a much more complicated way than is currently the case, a casual is a casual until a casual is not a casual when a specified event occurs. And what does the lucky dip selection of special events look like? Well, by election of the employee, that's straightforward enough and indeed available now. Then there's converted by order of the Fair Work Commission or converted by an industrial agreement, or better still, especially for the union movement, both employee and employer throw their hands up in frustration and convert the employee to ongoing, with lack of better alternative. Again, my old former colleague Chris Gardner and Henry Skeen recently wrote in the AFR, this bill proposes extensive changes to all casual employment from commencement, changes unnecessary to address the permanent casual loophole the minister claims to close. Unless what the government really wants to do is to stamp out casual employment more widely. And this is an old-school bait-and-switch, using the example of the casual truck driver with a 12-month roster to substantially restrict something the government and unions dislike. They conclude these measures, however well-intentioned, risk having precisely the opposite effect, driving uncertainty and insecurity for those people who actually want and feel well served by casual employment. And finally, the bill's provisions which stifle the ever-growing and diversifying gig economy. With the changes this bill makes to gig economy work, you can say goodbye to an affordable Friday night. Uber Eats will be more expensive, Deliveroo more expensive, Menulog, DoorDash, Uber, Shiba, Ola, all more expensive. Today, young people, students, part-time workers, indeed retirees in my electorate are making some extra money working the hours they want, when they want, through app-enabled work. They are on multiple apps simultaneously. Labor hates them. A year ago, in August 2022, the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations told the Job Summit, gig work drives down wages and it has been spreading like a cancer through the economy. Well, gig economy, here comes the chemotherapy for the cancer you supposedly pose. Under the bill, the Fair Work Commission will be given new jurisdiction to set minimum standards via minimum standard orders and guidelines for those working on digital labour platforms with low bargaining power. A new digital labour platform deactivation code will be developed. I know it sounds like Ministry of Love speak, but it will dictate the circumstances in which a gig worker can be exited from a digital platform, sort of like unfair dismissal, from a workplace into which the gig worker never actually walks. As the department's document called, minimum standards and increased access to dispute resolution for independent contractors annexure a supplementary analysis to impact analysis equivalent process. I kid you not, that is actually a thing. Says, if the Fair Work Commission determines that a deactivation is unfair, it will be able to order reinstatement to a digital labour platform and, where appropriate, make an order to restore lost pay. To say there is massive uncertainty about these provisions and their impact is an even greater understatement. In a world in which technology, and specifically generative AI, will change every iota of every activity with which this place concerns itself, including nowhere more so than the world of work, this war on the future is just madness. The legislation is confounding, confusing, cumbersome and chaotic. How on earth is a normal business operator, like those who work in my electorate, run off their feet as it is trying to make ends meet, understand what they are meant to do next? My old friends at Freehills were blunt. Make friends with a good IR lawyer. You will need them. This is nothing but a Christmas stocking stuffed to the brim for the Australian union movement and a Christmas nightmare for all Australian businesses.
I thank the honourable member for her contribution.